Hey guys, and welcome to the Week 7 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown. I'm your host, Jake Tribby. I couldn't be happier to be back for Week 7, and I'm joined by my co-host, Millionaire Maker winner, and one of the greatest spring football DFS players ever, Neil Orfield. Neil, how you doing this week?
I am doing well. We've had enough separation from the week 6 slate that now I'm doing well once again because I got my ass handed to me last week. I don't know how you did last week, Jake, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Week 6 certainly wasn't my best week. What's funny is that it was actually our best week by far in terms of projection accuracy. So all I had to do was not get cute and play the highest projected lineups
Yeah.
according to our projections. Unfortunately, I ended up getting pretty cute. I also had to late swap a good amount, so I got off a lot of COC Mariner and some of the other stronger plays for some less chalky plays. None of those less chalky plays really ended up doing very well. And of course, I won a showdown, but I was duped 4 times, so it only amounted to about $300, which is certainly better than nothing, but far from ideal. After I've had 3 different unique second place finishes that were all within a couple points of winning. So
Ooh.
pretty tilting week, but yeah, that's what UFL DFS is all about. All right, Neil, unless we talked before the show, you didn't really have anything else you wanted to discuss from week 6 or more broadly speaking, so we can just kind of get into things.
Yeah, we can talk about it as we go through the slate. I have a lot of, opinions about where things went wrong last week, where we can make adjustments this week, but nothing we need to talk about overarching. We can just talk about it as we get to the games.
Great. Sounds good. Yeah, I guess my only note for this week, and we'll talk about this more, is that this is going to be a very, very difficult week for late swap, mostly because all of the good game stacks and team stacks are in the Saturday games. So that's sort of my only overarching note for this slate before we get into these individual games here. But first, I wanted to talk about the Fantasy Points UFL DFS product. Here's what you get: player projections, main slate ownership projections, an exclusive UFL DFS Discord channel where you can ask me, Neil, Chris Wecht, Johnny Proctor questions about the slate, and access to my UFL articles. Those are going to be behind the paywall every other week. This week's is free, so you can go check that out whether you are a UFL subscriber or not. We've also slashed the sticker price of our UFL product down to $70 for the rest of the season. Promo code UFL 2024 gets you an additional 15% off on top of it. So that brings the weekly cost down to under $10 per week for the rest of the season. If you're on the fence about subscribing, now's the time to do it. And you can get even more value from our UFL product if you have access to ESPN Bet, because they are listing UFL player props. I was a little worried they'd go back on player props, not listing them as early as they did last week after what I would imagine was a really bad week for ESPN Bet. But they listed them again on Thursday, and the menu is surprisingly deep. They listed a prop for about 15 different players yesterday. There are some pretty significant discrepancies between these props and our projections, which makes for a great betting opportunity. The best part, you don't have to sit around in Discord for me to tell you what to bet, because we don't just display projected fantasy points. Our projections list out all the individual stats that go into our final projected fantasy point number, so you can see exactly how many receiving yards we have Justin Hall projected for, making the process of betting these props incredibly convenient for our subscribers. We went 5-1 on props last week. I know some people went a little beyond the official place that I listed and did even better. Final Marcus Sims reception prevented the clean sweep on player props, but it was still a really great week, and the board has a ton of value again this week. We also have potentially another Troy Williams similar type situation, which I will mention once we get to our final game of the slate here. But let's get into our first game. It's the Memphis Showboats at the Arlington Renegades. Memphis is a 5.5-point favorite. I believe this line opened at 3 and just has been continuously bet in favor of Arlington. I believe I said Memphis is a 5.5-point favorite. They're a 5.5-point underdog here. Arlington is favored. The total here is 45.5. Personally, I see a little bit of value on the Memphis side. 5.5 seems like a pretty big number given that Arlington just hasn't shown us much, although all their losses have been pretty close. And I also am slightly leaning towards the under. I'm not sure I'm going to bet the under. I'll look around after the show and see if I can find a solid Memphis number, but that plus 5.5 is pretty tempting to me. Neil, do you have any bets you're interested in here?
Yeah, I think I lean toward the under also, even though these are the two, I think, the worst defenses in the league. Like, as far as points allowed, these are the two defenses that have given up the most points so far this year. But I'm still leaning toward the under just because I'm not that confident that either of these offenses can really go off in a big way. Now, from a DFS perspective, we'll talk about that's going to be a different conversation. I might make that bet for DFS, but I'm not like when it's a 50-50 proposition over under, I would rather take the under, and I'm not super confident in these offenses. So I think I'd take the under here.
Yeah, I definitely side with you there. And then, yeah, I just think 5.5 is a bit too much for two teams that, in my head, I guess Arlington gets a bit of a home field lean here, but yeah, to me, these teams are a bit closer than 5.5. So I do think
Yeah.
I'll probably lay a little bit on Memphis here after the show. In terms of injuries, the Memphis side is clean, thankfully. They had a few guys pop up on the injury report midweek, but it was nothing significant. Everyone notable is listed as a starter. Arlington's side is also clean, but Isaiah Winstead and Lawan Winningham are both inactive this week. That's the first time that's happened all year. Caleb Vander Esch is listed as the backup wide receiver on the outside, but I really don't see much playing time for him. He's really only ever played slot for Arlington, so I'm not exactly sure what their plan is if Javonte Payton or Tyler Vaughns goes down. That would be a little interesting to see, but I would imagine just, probably 100% route shares are close to it for both of those outside wide receivers on Arlington. All right, here, starting with the Memphis Showboat side, Troy Williams is listed as the starting quarterback this week. To me, I think Williams gives this offense a bit of a boost for fantasy purposes, if only because he has a much stronger arm than Case Cookus. Overall, a less accurate passer. But, a guy like Dawood Davis, who leads the league in air yards, hasn't really been able to realize most of those air yards because Case Cookus has been underthrowing basically every deep ball that's come his way. Troy Williams seems to be a much more competent deep passer, at least on those, passes that are 30, 40, 50 yards downfield. So I do think he's a bit of a boost for the passing game. Also adds a bit of a rushing element that, while Cookus is a willing runner, he's a great athlete. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you here. This Arlington defense, total disaster. It's a really strong matchup for the Memphis Showboats offense. But, every week they just seem to fall short of our expectations. How are you sort of treating them this week in DFS?
Yeah, I'm in on it. I mean, this is a week where I'm gonna be. I've done it many times this year, Jake, where I think I largely am just like I'm gonna be a little bit underweight to the chalkiest quarterback and overweight to the other stacks. And I think I'm doing it once again this week. I think that this is a game where I'm definitely going to be overweight to both quarterbacks in this game. As I said, these are the two defenses that have given up the most points in the league so far this year, playing against each other. I love that we haven't really seen a lot of Troy Williams, so it's a little bit hard to know what to expect from Troy Williams, but he's just 8,600 in the best matchup that he could possibly have. We're projecting for 14% ownership, and I love how condensed the receiving options are for Troy Williams. So yeah, I'm going to be going in on this offense pretty hard, I think.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about Troy Williams is he's, not only is he cheap, he's at least right now the cheapest starting quarterback we have on the slate. But we know exactly who to pair him with. Even Dawood Davis at 7,700 is popping as, a top value for us, in part because his receiving workload has been so good, but also because Troy Williams has been feeding him the ball. We have a pretty small sample here for what it's worth, but over the last two games, Troy Williams has attempted 51 passes. He's targeted Dawood Davis 19 times. That's a 37% target share for Dawood Davis over the last two games, with Williams throwing the ball. In the first 4 weeks of the season, Dawood's target share was 21%. Case Cookus handled 79% of team passing attempts over that stretch. So I think there's a really strong case for a guy like Dawood Davis. Sage Surratt is looking like a decent value. I guess I'll ask you, beyond Dawood Davis, do you have a clear preference with those other three receivers? Because they feel pretty similar to me overall in terms of, upside. I guess Jonathan Adams would be the worst value as he's generally tended to be. But yeah, I'm curious what you think there for all the non-Dawood Davis Memphis receivers.
Yeah, not a huge lean among those guys. Jonathan Adams. I mean, Jonathan Adams is, as you said, the worst value. Who's also the best by ownership. He's only getting 2% projected ownership, whereas Papali is 8%, Sage Surratt at 11%. So which tends to happen. Usually, the better values are going to get a little bit more ownership. But as a result, I'm going to be mixing and matching. My guess is I end up overweight to all three of Papali, Sage Surratt, and Jonathan Adams. Dawood Davis, I'm probably not going to be overweight to 34%, I would guess. But I would guess I'm going to be close there because, as I said, I'm going in on this offense. I'm going to be mixing and matching all four of those receivers. You look at the past 2 weeks, in terms of routes run, Dawood Davis at 75, Jonathan Adams 73, both Vinny Papali and Sage Surratt 67 each. That's 87% route share for Davis, 85% Jonathan Adams, and then 78% each for Vinny Papali and Sage Surratt for a team that has been throwing the ball quite a bit. So this is kind of elite in terms of route participation. Now, target share, as you noted, there's a big drop off after Dawood Davis. 24 targets over the past 2 weeks, whereas we have 9 going to Vinny Papali, 5 to Sage Surratt, and 7 to Jonathan Adams. So by targets, that's not elite for those other three, but I'm willing in this matchup, when we have such a good matchup and we have low ownership, I'm going to lean into it. Hope that they're running enough routes. Hope that the target share ticks up a little bit for one of these guys, and we can get two receivers that end up doing really well. So I'm going to be overweight to the field on Troy Williams, probably by a good amount, and probably generally going to be double stacking and mixing and matching who I'm pairing him with.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I will also be mixing and matching. You could make an argument that Troy Williams, deep passing, as I said previously, stronger deep passer overall, at least for fantasy purposes, than a guy like Case Cookus is. You can make an argument that helps out Jonathan Adams, who does tend to get a good amount of deep targets. I believe he's second on the team after Dawood Davis. I guess my problem with Adams is he just can't really separate. He feels a lot like a guy like Devontae Parker, where sure, I mean, he can definitely land those jump balls, but he's never wide open like Dawood Davis can be.
Yeah.
I'm tempted by the ownership there, but I would agree with you. I don't really have a clear lean. But there's also another player on this offense who has a fantastic matchup, and that would be Darius Victor. Arlington is allowing the most yards per carry, the most rushing yards per game, and the second highest rushing rate at 41%. And with Troy Williams starting, I do think that probably boosts Victor's per carry average a bit. We've seen that historically at pretty much every level of football. Rushing quarterbacks do help out the running backs be a little bit more efficient. You could also argue, the opposite way there, where you say, hey, Troy Williams is actually going to steal some carries. They might, do some read options or whatever near the goal line, where Troy Williams will just choose to keep the ball. I think that's maybe getting a little too cute with the analysis. I don't think it's going to take much away from Darius Victor's workload. I think the biggest issue for Victor is going to be just general offensive competency. I mean, we've seen his workload has just been absolutely fantastic, with the major obstacle being that Memphis just can't really score points. I mean, he was at a 91% snap share last week, 66% route share, 91% of backfield weighted opportunity. I feel like this is probably the fourth time this year I've rattled off stats like that for Darius Victor in terms of his previous week usage. Third best workload in terms of weighted opportunity last week. So he's underperforming weighted opportunity by just a massive margin. But I mean, you have to be pretty tempted by the workload here. The only problem is that, he's priced down to 6,900. He's projecting pretty okay everywhere. I think he's going to be really popular. And, at 29% ownership, I just wonder how many people are going to see that and say, oh, there's no way I'm playing Darius Victor at 29%. So Neil, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I really like it. He is 6,900. You can also, I do think that you can pair him with Troy Williams. Actually saw 6 targets last week, as you noted, had 66% route participation, something along there, along with 11 carries. So as you like, the weighted opportunity just so good for Darius Victor, and you can't ask for a better matchup than against the Renegades. So really hard for me to want to get away from it, even as somebody who tends to fade the chalk somewhat. I'm usually, when players get a little bit too chalky, I like to be underweight. I don't know that I'll be underweight to a 6,900 Darius Victor. I think that I'll mix him in some of my lineups with Troy Williams. I'm also in some spots, I might just say, hey, maybe they just do it on the ground instead of through the air. So maybe have him in some builds that are not, based around the offense also, and just hope that they just feed him the rock once again. I'm into it. I'll probably be right around the field on Darius Victor, right around 29%.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't hate the idea. I don't know if I'll roll one of these out, but I might. I don't hate the idea of like a full-blown Memphis
I
onslaught
don't
where you
either.
double stack Troy Williams with 2 wide receivers and you add in Darius Victor. Because, I mean, if there's ever a week for Memphis to score 35 points, it would be this week against Arlington. You could maybe argue that Darius Victor could get game scripted out. I mean, you want him getting the carries, especially inside the red zone. If they're down by 14, they're probably just going to throw every time they get inside the 10, and that could be a little bad for Victor. But we've seen him run a lot of routes. I mean, he's the clear check down option here, so I don't think game script is a huge concern, but it probably does hurt his ceiling a bit. Anything else to add on this Memphis offense before we move on to Arlington?
No, I'm going to be in on this offense. I think that we've covered it all pretty well, though.
Great. All right. The Arlington side, I'm also very tempted here. I mean, we've acknowledged that Arlington's a great matchup for Memphis. Memphis is also a fantastic matchup for Arlington. I guess the trickiest part for me is I'm not exactly sure how I want to stack Luis Perez. I think I'll be, in Luis Perez lineups, I'll be exclusively rolling out doubles, probably maybe a triple or two. But it's hard to figure out who to go with here. The nice thing is they're pretty condensed. I mean, we know it's going to be Tyler Vaughn, Sal Cannella, Deontay Burnett, and JP Payton catching these passes. It's just kind of tricky to know what direction to go. Sal Cannella is popping as a pretty strong value for us, but to me, he's more tempting in like cash games or smaller tournaments because he's never shown a massive ceiling. I'm curious if you disagree with this at all because our contests have gotten so small. I mean, I think we're only 2,300 entries in the main $20 GPP, but Sal Canella's only scored over 15 DraftKings points twice in his last 16 regular season games, not going over 17.8 in that span. So, the chances that Sal Cannella ends up posting, a had to have it score, I think are pretty low, despite the fact that he projects as a strong median value for us. So I'll ask you, Neil, who do you like in terms of this Arlington passing attack? Where do you fall on Luis Perez, who's going to be, fairly popular relative to recent weeks? We have him at 9%. I could see, maybe up to 12.
Yeah, similarly, I'm going to be overweight, I think, to the 9% Luis Perez. And again, this is a game that could go a lot of directions. It's an ugly game where it's bad offenses or bad defenses, really, and then the offense is not like elite either. So I think it could go a lot of different ways. But when the offense is not getting crazy high ownership and it's just 9% here for Luis Perez, I am going to be overweight to Luis Perez also. And as far as who I'm stacking with, that's an interesting stat for Sal Cannella. If you had asked me whether he put up any 20-point games last year in the XFL, I 100% would have thought he did, because he had a couple games where it seemed like he was targeted just constantly. But still needs to get there with the touchdowns, the yardage, and he doesn't really have a lot of like huge long plays. So I guess it's mostly just short PPR scam kind of plays, kind of a player. Because I'm in on this offense, I'm probably not going to be super underweight to Sal Cannella, but I don't love seeing that he is 21%. If he was coming in at 4%, I would say, I'll take my shots and just hope that this is the game where he finally does break out. But when he's at 21%, yeah, I'm probably going to be a little bit underweight to Sal Cannella. If I can get Deontay Burnett at 10% at just $300 more, yeah, I'm more into the guy who is, I think has just as much upside and is getting half the ownership for just $300 more. JP Payton, 6,700, 14% ownership. It's going to be a mix and match of those four: Tyler Vaughns, Sal Cannella, Deontay Burnett, JP Payton. I don't feel as strongly about Tyler Vaughns as the number one here as I do in the last game with I'm already forgetting what the last game we talked about. David Davis. As David Davis, I don't feel like it's as clear of a split here between Tyler Vaughns and the rest of the group for Arlington. So my guess is that I'm actually going to be a little bit underweight to Tyler Vaughns and overweight to, Deontay Burnett, I guess, is the one that kind of stands out to me at 10% ownership of this group. You just look at the past two games, it's 12 targets for Tyler Vaughns, 16 for Sal Cannella, 11 for Deontay Burnett, 16 for JP Payton. So for Tyler Vaughns to be getting 31% ownership while nobody else is getting more than 21% for Cannella, 10% Burnett, 14% JP Payton, and Tyler Vaughns is the most expensive by far, he's probably the one that I'm going to be a little bit underweight to, while I'm a little bit overweight to Payton, Burnett, and probably around the field on Cannella, maybe slightly light there.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would imagine, and I've made a few hand builds so far, and I'm guilty of this as well. I would imagine most people playing Perez are just going to auto select Tyler Vaughns, especially in hand builds. I mean, Optos, you'll get to some different stuff, but I think you can get a pretty unique Luis Perez team by just playing two non-Tyler Vaughns receivers in this group. I don't have a strong preference in terms of these other guys. I mean, I've always been a pretty big fan of Deontay Burnett. We've seen the ceiling even this season with JP Payton. And like I said, I don't see a great ceiling with Cannella, especially at ownership. I think he's a guy I want to be a little underweight on, but still more than fine play at 5,900. Any other thoughts on this passing attack before we talk about the backfield?
No, I love, again, that it is condensed to really those four are the only four that I would consider of the pass catchers: Tyler Vaughn, Sal Cannella, Deontay Burnett, JP Payton. Love that there's only four that you really need to even think about here. But yeah, nothing else to talk about there.
Yeah, I think more broadly speaking, you could make an argument that this is actually the best offensive environment of the slate. I know that Birmingham and St. Louis has the highest total at 47.5. But those teams also have great defenses. Yeah. So I would be a little bit more worried. We'll talk about that later, but I do have some concern that this could be more of a defensive battle than I would imagine most DFS players and even just fans of the UFL would hope for. And that could really open the door to some game stacks from this contest, getting you there in tournaments. All right. In terms of the backfield, it was a very, very unfortunate situation last week. I played a ton of Day Hunter. I know a lot of our subs got pushed toward a lot of Day Hunter. He looked great. He scored a touchdown, and then Sal Cannella picked him up during the celebration, dropped him, and he is now out for the season on IR. Very, very disappointing. As a result, Arlington signed Devin Darrington, who was with them in camp. He's going to be active this week as the RB3. That's a pretty crucial note, I think. It feels to me like the team's pretty burnt out on both Davion Smith and even Letty Brown. So I wouldn't be surprised if Darrington got some real run this week at running back. I don't believe he's in the player pool. I hope they either add him or at least, I mean, he wouldn't be in play for main slate, even probably at 4K. But for Showdown, he could be a little interesting. Either way, though, I mean, you could make an argument for Davion Smith. The Memphis defense isn't great. Arlington could put up points here. At the same time, though, I mean, I'll just come back to what I've said in previous weeks. He's rotating with Letty Brown. Devin Darrington will be involved. And, unfortunately, Lindsey Scott will steal some red zone reps, although we haven't seen quite as much of that lately. So, yeah, Neil, I'm curious where you fall in this backfield. I would imagine, no real interest in a guy like Letty Brown at 6,100 or, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's hard because this is like, again, I want to be playing the running backs in this. I want to be playing all sides of this game. This feels like one where I'm going to be really in on three sides of the game, and then this is the one that's actually going to go off when I'm not playing it. But I think I'm probably going to take that risk because they have a three-headed backfield, I think. And even, I mean, Devion Smith has 20 carries and 6 targets, like 10 carries and 3 targets per game over the past 2 weeks. He's still getting decent volume, and he's only 6,300, and it's a great matchup. But I think that was partially because, Day Hunter was their other running back. He was kind of the only running back available last week after Day Hunter went down. So yeah, I think it probably is a stay away spot for me, and just hope that they give it to the running back who's not in the player pool. That's going to be my hope here, is that they just lean on the new guy, because I don't really want to be playing Letty Brown or Devion Smith.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, when I was looking through their camp roster, I thought Devin Darrington would be the number one back. He's really good. He was really great with the Orlando Guardians last year, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him emerge a bit, sort of like we saw Day Hunter emerge throughout the season. I would think by week 9, 10, Darrington could be a pretty compelling play, assuming he's sub 6K. But we'll have to talk about that once we get there. Any other notes on this game? I think we've pretty much covered everything here. Both the defenses, I guess, are a little tempting. It's interesting because I just see a huge range of outcomes for these defenses. We have Arlington projecting as a pretty solid value overall at only 3,600. I know we don't comment on defense much, but do you have anything else before we move on?
Yeah, I haven't even looked at the pricing or the ownership for the defenses, but yeah, 3,600, that is pretty low. The defenses have been a little bit more expensive in general for the UFL.
Yeah, I think our most expensive defense this week is 4,400. Normally we've had, a couple at like 48 or 5K. So pricing is fairly tight. It's been fairly tight these last 2 weeks. So we do anticipate a lot of people getting down to the Arlington defense. We actually have them as the highest owned player of the slate overall at 41%. So that's pretty tough. I think regardless of whether it's, UFL or NFL DFS, when a defense is super chalky, it's generally pretty wise to get away from them.
Yeah, I heard Cody having that conversation the other week of like, it could be a little bit of a different equation if a defense is in a really good spot here. Like maybe sometimes you can eat the chalk a little bit more in UFL, particularly in these smaller contests. And I agree with him, but this is not one of those scenarios where Arlington defense is not that great. So if they're going to be 41% just because of that price tag and because of the volatility here, it'd be a stay away. It's going to be a fade for me at 41%. Now I don't totally buy that it's necessarily going to get there. Like if you told me 100% it's going to be 41% or higher, it would be a full fade for me. But I kind of think the field might be too sharp to really do that. So I'll probably play some just because I don't actually think they're going to be that high. But yeah, if they're going to be the chalkiest defense, I'm probably just going to go elsewhere to some of the better defenses on the slate.
Yeah, I think that's a good note. I may end up walking their ownership back a little bit, but I mean, man, even if I do, I seriously doubt I'll get it lower than like 35%. I think this Arlington defense is going to be pretty popular this week. All right, moving on to our second Saturday game. This is looking like the game of the year, probably a preview of the championship game in the UFL. It's the St. Louis Battlehawks at the Birmingham Stallions. St. Louis is a 4-point underdog here. Total's 47.5. I see a little bit of value on the over. Yeah, I don't know. This game's probably a stay away from me in terms of betting. Do you have any takes here, Neil?
Yeah, I think it is also a stay away from me in terms of betting the over up at 47.5. If I were going to take anything, I'd probably take the under. But as you said, I mean, these are two good offenses. This is another game that could go a lot of different directions. Yeah, I guess I would lean the under if I'm taking anything in this game, the under 47.5. But it's also probably a stay away for me.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, I'm not sure how much influence public money really has, but I could definitely see the total getting steamed another half point or so prior to kickoff. So I think if you want to bet the under, it might be wise to wait a little bit, but that's a pretty speculative assumption by me. I'm really not sure if how many people are just gonna, be casual and say, oh yeah, auto over because it's the two best offenses here. I will actually be attending this game. So I'm very, very
Ooh.
excited. Yeah, gonna be driving down to Birmingham, and should be a great time. Weather's looking really great, so quite excited for that. Starting out with, got to cover injuries. St. Louis side is clean, but on the Birmingham side, Amari Rogers is out with a concussion that he suffered on his first touch last week. I'd expect a healthy dose of Marlon Williams in the slot, and Isaiah Zuber should also get some slot reps. Starting with the St. Louis side, AJ McCarron is projecting for, I believe, his lowest ownership total that we've seen all season. We have him at 9.7%. And it's tricky because this Birmingham defense has just been, outstanding overall. And, these McCarron double stacks, if you're stacking McCarron with, say, Hakeem Butler and Marcel Aitman, you're using up a ton of salary, and you're really not going to land on a team that projects particularly well. I mean, we all know they have the ceiling. But yeah, Neil, I'm very curious where you fall in this St. Louis passing attack, because, at least for me, I think it's going to be pretty hard to land on a lot of McCarron stacks in a week where pricing's relatively tight.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to do a ton of it. Obviously, it's the worst matchup in the league up against the Birmingham Stallions. So that's kind of the reason. Otherwise, in a nice matchup, I might say, like, I'll pay up to be contrarian, like just play a bunch of cheap guys to make it work. But against this Birmingham Stallions defense, it's a lot to ask to pay 10,200 for Hakeem Butler, 11,000 for AJ McCarron. I'll probably have it a little bit, but it'll probably be like 5% of my portfolio. Like, I don't think I'll play more than 5 to 8. Like, I think I'm going to be underweight to AJ McCarron, which is, it's crazy to me to hear myself say that when he is 10% owned and he's AJ McCarron. But I imagine I'm going to be underweight there and playing some of the cheaper quarterbacks, because that's just a really hefty price to pay for AJ McCarron. And I'm not that confident that he's going to, outscore the quarterbacks in the other games who are a lot cheaper. So probably underweight to AJ McCarron. But here or there, I might pay up to be contrarian.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm not even confident that AJ McCarron can outscore the other quarterback in this game, and I think that's, we'll talk about Martinez a little bit later, but I think that's, one of the ways you can play this is you can just say, I don't want McCarron, play Martinez with a bunch of these Battlehawks wide receivers. I think is pretty interesting. But I'm in a similar spot to you. I seriously doubt I get over 10%. In terms of McCarron, although when it comes to his receivers, I do have a few plays that stand out to me. Just from like a film grinding, scheme type situation or, outlook, I'm a little concerned about Hakeem Butler. I feel like Birmingham's just going to say, we're taking Hakeem Butler out of this game. We're going to make you beat us with someone else. We saw that a little bit last week where Butler, prior to a few of his bigger plays, he was interviewed on the sideline and he was like, yeah, I'm getting bracketed every single play. And then as soon as they didn't bracket him, he scored. Just turns into a monster against single coverage. So I would imagine Birmingham's just going to say, look, you got to beat us with Marcel Aitman. You got to beat us with Pearson. But that's, again, that's just sort of a speculative film watcher take. But the guys that I am pretty interested in, one is Marcel Aitman. I mean, he's out there for every route. He's been priced down a little bit to 7,200. We've seen a solid ceiling. And again, if you think the defense is going to pay a little more attention to Hakeem Butler, that should present Aitman with some solid one-on-one opportunities on the outside. The other guy I'm interested in, at least as a salary saving option here, is Steven Mitchell. Hakeem Butler did get hurt. He missed maybe 5 or 10 plays last week due to an injury. But even so, Steven Mitchell matched Ja'Cour Pearson in terms of total routes. They both had 27. And Mitchell, he got fed. He scored a touchdown. He looked pretty good. To me, I was surprised that they cut him earlier in the season. They did re-sign him around week 3, if I remember correctly. But to me, I mean, he's like the go ball deep threat within this offense. He'll probably get a couple, random targets here and there. But, if anyone's live to score an 80-yard touchdown sub 5K, Steven Mitchell is, right there at the top of that list. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on I guess sort of these non-Hakeem Butler options for St. Louis, and any love for Stephen Mitchell in this matchup?
Yeah, so I went well overweight last week on a few really low owned plays, and some of them I think I was wrong to do so, and like it didn't work out because I was just wrong. Like I read the situation wrong. Here I think I read the situation right with Marcel Aitman, and it just didn't work out. And like you see, he only had 5 targets last week, but he also like you could see like I think there were 3 different times that they were looking his way, and then he got pass interfered with, and one of them in the end zone, he was being held in the end zone. Like they wanted to get the ball to Marcel Aitman, but the defense just kept fouling him. So it was like they couldn't get him the ball because the defenders just kept grabbing onto him again, including one in the end zone where it was like he was going to catch the ball. The defender made a smart play to just hold him, to not let him get the ball. So I'm going to go right back to Marcel Aitman. Now we've got him. He's still just 7,200, still cheap, only 2% projected ownership. Even if he comes in, triple that, I'd still be well over the overweight to the field on Marcel Aitman, just given his participation in this offense. He is the only other like really big bodied receiver for St. Louis, I think. So yeah, sign me up for some Marcel Aitman, especially if your theory plays out where they are bracketing Hakeem Butler, just allowing the other receivers, making them do the damage. Then I think Marcel Aitman is a guy that they could really go to, the other big bodied receiver there, and I think he's a talented receiver also. So I'm definitely into it with Marcel Aitman. Hakeem Butler, I don't see there's any way that he's actually just 12%. Like we haven't projected for 12% ownership, which I understand like why you would set him there, like based on the algorithm, but just given how well he's done, like it's hard for me to imagine the field not wanting to go in on this guy. Like just go back to the guy who gets the ball constantly. If he's at 12%, I would love Hakeem Butler. I'm willing to take the risk that he's going to be double covered if he is 12%. But I imagine he's going to be higher than that. So I'm probably going to be overweight to the field on Aitman. Probably Stephen Mitchell. I love that call out. He's just 4,000, projecting for 3% ownership. I think that seems realistic to me. It was targeted 5 times last week. I love the call on Stephen Mitchell. I guess that is a way that you can bring down, if you want to play that stack, if you want to go to AJ McCarron and one of the more expensive receivers, throw Stephen Mitchell in there. Suddenly you're bringing down the price of the entire stack. And I think the ownership too, like I think the projected ownership there is more realistic, I think, for Stephen Mitchell. So yeah, count me in there. I'm also, I think 10% ownership going to Ja'Cour Pearson. I'm willing to go there. I think we just have a 2-game sample, right? He just came back 2 games ago, and 2 games ago he was didn't have full route participation, but they still targeted him like 10 times. Now last week the targets fell off, still not at full route participation, but I'm willing to make the bet that they still want to get him the ball. Actually, still was. He was targeted 8 times last game. Did not feel like that to me, but he had 5 receptions on 8 targets last game. So even though he's not a full route participant, only 66% last week, they're still just trying to get him the ball. So I still think the 92% ownership is pretty reasonable on Ja'Cour Pearson. It's weird because I'm not really into AJ McCarron, but I'm like, at this level of ownership, I would be in on Hakeem Butler, Marcel Aitman, Ja'Cour Pearson, and Stephen Mitchell. So maybe my AJ McCarron ownership comes up higher than I expect just because I want to play all of these receivers.
Yeah, definitely like those takes. I mean, to me, I find myself like, why not just save the 200, go down to Adrian Martinez? What do you think the chances are that a McCarron manages to outscore Martinez in this game? Maybe 20%. It's pretty low.
Yeah.
But you could still see, you could see multiple St. Louis wide receivers get there. Martinez drops, 30 on the back of his legs. And, then you're pretty much stuck in the mud if you play any McCarron stacks. So that's kind of the tough part. And, when it comes to Butler's projected ownership, I definitely see your argument that, he's broken the last 2 slates. So, I could see more people trying to force him in. The problem is if you play either Martinez or McCarron plus Butler, and then, we really don't have many great running back options. We'll talk about Darius. We talked about Darius Victor, who's a little cheaper. We'll talk about Darius Higgins a little bit later. But if you want to play another great running back, say like John Lovett, you're left with 5,500 per player if you include the cheapest defense. And just sub 6K, there are not many compelling flex options this week. So I think most people are going to look at these Hakeem Butler plus either Martinez or McCarron builds and just say, this is way too gross. I don't want to play Stephen Mitchell and Justin Smith, on these teams, because it just seems like a lot playing 2 of these, sub 5,500 wide receivers where they could legitimately zero.
Yeah, and I will say there's a reason that you're doing the ownership and I'm not, because you've been crushing the ownership every week. You and Chris have absolutely been nailing the ownership. So I'm probably over expecting, the field, over adjusting for Hakeem Butler. It just, that ownership feels so low to me, and I
Yeah.
expected it to look and be like, oh, he's going to be the chalk, obviously, because he's gone off. Yeah, if he does come in at this ownership once again, I'm willing to go to some of these cheap guys like Steven Mitchell, pair him with Hakeem Butler to try and make it work. But yeah, that's a good point, that there aren't that many. There's no like super cheap, awesome running backs where we can't try to make Morgan Ellison work again after last week. That's how I tried to make that stuff work last week, and that was a disaster. This week doesn't look so good. So you might be right about it.
Yeah, that was tough. I mean, you could have gotten there on Ellison if his first carry didn't go for -5 yards inside the red zone.
That was brutal.
Yeah, that might have changed things a little bit. And then when it comes to the backfield, I mean, this is pretty straightforward. I'd say Jacob Sailors is going to earn about 70% of backfield weighted opportunity, maybe even more than that. Last week he was at 92%, 72% of snaps. Yeah, pretty strong workload here for Jacob Sailors. He has been priced up, so it doesn't look like he'll be the highest owned running back of the slate like he had been these last few weeks. 21% ownership. Curious on your thoughts on Jacob Sailors there.
Yeah, just at this price tag against the Stallions, I'm going to be underweight to 21% on Jacob Sailors. Just kind of lean into some of the somewhat less expensive options, or options in better matchups. He is, I mean, the reason we've wanted to play him in the past is he is the bell cow on one of the best offenses in the league. It's just it's a really, really tough matchup, and the price tag is up. So I imagine I'll be underweight to Jacob Sailors.
Yeah, I haven't really decided if I have a strong preference between him and John Lovett. I think if you're paying up at running back, those are going to be the two guys you look at. I'll probably end up around the field, but I will be largely hand building this week because of my travel to Birmingham. So who knows where my percentages could end up after I hand build 15 or 20 teams. Right. All right, I think we covered pretty much everything on the St. Louis side. I don't really think, I mean, Blake Jackson is just so dust. He broke a finger last week. I don't think he's on the injury report, but he like on the broadcast, you could tell he broke a finger, lifted his hand up. It looked pretty gnarly, but only 2 routes. I mean, it's very over for the Blake Jackson gang.
You're talking about just me there, by the way.
Yeah, pretty
Jackson
much just you.
here.
Yeah. We got the one man Blake Jackson gang. So I had to mention that for our resident Blake Jackson fan.
Yeah.
All right. That covers everything for the St. Louis side. On the Birmingham side, Adrian Martinez stacks once again are live to break the slate. He's averaging 35 DraftKings fantasy points per game, 0.87 fantasy points per dropback. For those who don't have a great reference point in terms of how good 0.87 fantasy points per dropback is, 2019 Lamar Jackson, who is the best fantasy quarterback we've ever seen, averaged 0.91 fantasy points per dropback. Adrian Martinez is basically an unheard of territory, like MVP Lamar Jackson territory in terms of the amount of fantasy points he's been scoring. And it's tough because he's gotten it done with his legs. He had a 136-yard rushing game earlier in the year. He's also gotten it done through the air. He has 2 games where he's hit the 300-yard passing bonus. It's just looked fantastic. Hard to believe, if he keeps playing like this, he's definitely going to end up on an NFL practice squad here pretty soon. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you. I know that you're generally underweight the chalk. We have Adrian Martinez at 36%. Very safe to say he's going to be the highest owned quarterback of the slate. How do you feel about Martinez? And then how do you feel about some of these other pass game options? Because, we saw Deion Kane's route share drop to 55% last week. That's a little concerning when you're paying 7,500. Marlon Williams had a great game, and he's expected to play a lot, but he's also priced up at 6,100. And we always have Sternberger, whose price really hasn't budged much. Curious on your thoughts here.
Yeah, I feel like a fish saying that I'm going to be underweight to Adrian Martinez because he's cheaper than AJ McCarron, and he is just so good. He's just done it every single week. But I think that I'll probably be slightly underweight. It's again, I'm not going to X him out of my player pool, but I'll probably cap myself at 30% or so, like just like and hope that he becomes chalkier than he is. Like we haven't projected for 36% ownership. This is another one where I'm like, he might just steal that AJ McCarron ownership. He might be 46% to AJ McCarron 0. Obviously not to that extreme, but like I could see that happening where people are just like, why would I play AJ McCarron when I can just play Adrian Martinez, who crushes every single week? But it's also a tough matchup for him against the Battlehawks. I also, one of my stands last week was I'm not going to play him naked, and I would have been better off playing him naked because I obviously what you actually wanted was the double stack, but it was none of the receivers that I played last week. It was the receivers that I was off last week. So if you played him naked, you're actually in a great spot last week for Adrian Martinez. I still think once again in my Adrian Martinez stacks, I'm going to be put in at least one receiver. I'm not playing him naked once again. Now, of course, it's going to be Isaiah Zuber or whatever receiver there is that I'm not playing again is probably going to be the guy. Or maybe it just spreads it out enough that none of the receivers get there. But have to imagine to pay off this 10,800 price tag. Same point I made last week. Like it's so hard to pay off that kind of price tag just through the ground. Now, Adrian Martinez has shown that he can do it. Like what do you have, 160 rushing yards a couple weeks back? At which point, he can get it done. But it is really asking a lot against this St. Louis defense. So again, I'm probably not playing him naked. As far as who I want to pair him with is tough because I still think Deion Kane is probably the best receiver here, but only 22 routes run last week for Deion Kane. So that actually dropped down quite a bit, just 55% route participation. They really do spread it out. So honestly, that's one more like kind of knock against him is that I don't know who to pair him with. I think that probably one of his, like if he gets there, if he pays off this price tag, he's probably bringing along one of these pass catches with him. But the highest that we have in terms of route participation is both Jay Sternberger and Marlon Williams at 72.5%. Then a drop down to 55% for Deion Kane, 45% Benjamin Victor, 52.5% Kevin Austin. Like they're just really throwing a rotation at us in the receiving game. So it's a little bit tough for me to want to play. I mean, that's not a great reason to not play him. Like if you do think that he is clearly going to get there, but since we have a situation where he's chalk, he's against a tough defense, and I don't love the rotation. Again, it's just a knock do. I'd rather go to the quarterbacks that are not getting ownership, and I know who to pair them with. So I think I'll be underweight to this passing attack.
Yeah, and I think, the tough defense is probably the best argument you could make for being underweight to, either these receivers or this passing attack as a whole. St. Louis is allowing just 149.8 passing yards per game, 5.2 yards per attempt. Those are both by far the toughest in the UFL. PFF second highest graded defense behind only Birmingham. So yeah, this is, Martinez's toughest challenge yet. I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up as a game where he had to use his legs a little bit more because the St. Louis passing defense has just been so good thus far. I don't really have a clear lean in terms of who I want to pair Martinez with, which makes it pretty tough. I would think a lot of my Martinez builds will probably lean more into St. Louis wide receivers than they will Birmingham wide receivers. That said, it's always the guy we're not expecting, right? And Benjamin Victor is, I think, a pretty capable wide receiver on the outside. If they're committed to only playing Deion Kane for 50 or 60% of those routes, Victor will steal some of those. So that's certainly a good sign. Gary Jennings, for what it's worth, has continuously broken Neal's routes run per yards model because he hasn't caught a pass yet, and he's run about 70 routes. So, he's probably due for a 30-point game. Really, really tough to say. And it's even tougher because all these guys have just been priced up. I mean, the three options that we want to use, which would be Kane, Marlon Williams, Jay Sternberger, are all 6K or more. And that's just really tough. Kevin Austin, I don't really want to chase at 4,800. I'm sure some people will, but, if he doesn't catch that 180-yard touchdown, he doesn't give you anything last week. Yeah, so I think Benjamin Victor, even just for the salary savings, he might give you 4 points, but it still enables you to get up to some of the best plays of the slate. So he might be the guy that I actually end up on the most, which makes me incredibly nervous because there's a decent chance he just zeros or gives you 1 or 2 fantasy points. But, all he needs is one long catch or a touchdown to get you there at 3,700. Anything you wanted to add on with these receivers?
I'll just say that I would absolutely not play two of these receivers in a lineup unless you're playing Adrian Martinez. Because if two of these receivers get here, then Adrian Martinez is absolutely going to get there. But yeah, I think Jay Sternberger, Marlon Williams, I would probably consider them in lineups that don't have. I thought about saying I wouldn't play any of these receivers in non-Adrian Martinez lineups, but I wanted to walk that back a little. I wouldn't play two of them. I probably will sparingly play, here and there, a Jay Sternberger in a non-Martinez lineup, a Marlon Williams, Deion Kane maybe, or your Benjamin Victor. I like that call. That's he's kind of interesting. Also, Kevin Austin there as well as options. Like I'll play them sparingly in non-Martinez lineups, but I'm probably for the most part reserving them for when I'm stacking up the team.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. I would never play two of these guys in a non-Martinez lineup, and I'd be more. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think I'd be more willing to play the cheaper guys because if Kevin Austin or Benjamin Victor gets to 14 or 15 points, that could still mean Martinez had a pretty bad game as a passer or just overall for fantasy. Whereas if Jay Sternberger or Marlon Williams gets to 20,
Right.
it's going to be pretty. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be pretty tough, and the other thing too is that Martinez is going to be so popular that Kane, Sternberger, and Williams, those are going to be the guys everyone wants to pair him with. Yep. So again, if either of them gets a 20, it's going to be hard not to see a Martinez team take down most of the tournaments this week. All right, moving on to the backfield here. Ricky Person is still listed as the starter, which for as I said previously, I think that's a great move by Birmingham. I still think he's the best all-purpose back in the UFL. He should definitely be on a practice squad. Hopefully he gets an opportunity by the end of the year. But to me, I kind of like CJ Maribel a little bit more this week, partially because of ownership. I mean, you save $800 by playing Maribel. Maribel's at 8,000. Ricky Person's at 8,800. We have Maribel projected for 4% ownership, Person projected for 10. And while Person's projection is a little bit stronger, he's popping as a slightly better value for us. I think it's important to note that St. Louis is really the only team Birmingham's played all year and probably will play all year that can force them into some serious negative game script. For what it's worth, CJ Maribel has an 18% higher route share and is averaging 1.2 more targets per game than Ricky Person. If there's a scenario where St. Louis gets out, way ahead, say they go up 14-0 or 17-3, something like that, I think CJ Maribel ends up getting a lot more run than what we have projected. Granted, it won't be significant. Ricky Person is still a solid receiver. He could still steal those red zone touches. But any love for CJ Maribel this week at just 8K?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really strong call that Maribel at 4% ownership as the more involved in the passing game back. I prefer that bet to the Ricky Person bet, even though Ricky Person had 11 carries to CJ Maribel. Now you are, of course, the UFL running back weighted opportunity guy, and I think you make a good point that that CJ Maribel, once you weight the opportunities, those passing game opportunities are just worth more than carries. So it's at lower ownership and a cheaper price tag. I think that my preference between the two of them is going to be CJ Maribel. I could see myself be like 14% total ownership going to these running backs. I would imagine I'm going to be underweight to 14% total for the two of them, but it could be like 6% Maribel, 4% Person, 8% Maribel, 4% Person. I think that I'll have more Maribel than Person, but I think both of them, I'm not going overboard for either of these guys at these price tags in this matchup.
Yeah, I think I'll be pretty similar here. For what it's worth, the way you want to attack St. Louis is, on the ground. So I think you could see both of these guys be a little bit more involved than we've seen in previous weeks. I also think you can pair Maribel with Adrian Martinez. I'm not exactly I don't think I want to do that with Ricky Person. Person mostly going to get there on, rushing yardage, rushing touchdowns, whereas Maribel, again, has a bit stronger of a receiving role. Maribel was really close to what was, I think, going to be a 35-yard touchdown. I forget if he lined up at wide receiver, if it was on a wheel route, but Martinez just missed him and was clearly pretty upset about it. So you could definitely get, and he still caught a receiving touchdown last week, if I remember right. So he almost had 2 receiving touchdowns last week. So yeah, Maribel is definitely the guy that I would rather target in Martinez lineups. And I think that's an interesting way to get unique here is you just go Martinez plus Maribel, maybe add in a St. Louis pass catcher or 2.
That is interesting. Let me walk back I was saying that I'm probably going to be underweight to the backfield overall, but it's also a really nice leverage spot. So now I'm kind of second guessing myself. Like this is like, if Adrian Martinez fails, it could be because they just decide to feed the rock to their running backs. Of course, it could be, Adrian Martinez is also a very, very good runner. So if they're attacking on the ground, it might just be the Adrian Martinez show. But that's kind of an interesting, like, what if the rushing touchdowns just go to Ricky Person or CJ Maribel? So I guess I'm not sure that I'm going to be underweight to the 14% in the backfield, because there are, it is an interesting leverage spot for a low owned backfield versus a very chalky quarterback. It's kind of interesting, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to get away from Martinez, either you're taking a stand that Birmingham just has a terrible game, or you could lean more into these running backs. I think especially Person, but yeah, I mean, either or really with Person or Maribel here, both would be fine if you want to get away from Martinez. But man, it feels like a tough sell. All right, Neil. Anything else on this game here before we move on?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
Okay. I guess I'll just throw out Jordan Thomas is probably a little interesting for Showdown, if only because Birmingham ran the exact same play on 4 different
Good
two-point
point.
conversions last week, and I think he scored on all of them. So if they attempt to pass from the 5, they will probably try something like that. At the same time, though, you could argue like St. Louis is watching this film. They're gonna have something ready for this, clear out Jordan Thomas ISO against a linebacker over the middle play. But he's a little interesting for Showdown just because he could catch a touchdown. All right, moving on to our first game on Sunday. This game kicks off at noon Eastern. It's the Michigan Panthers at the DC Defenders. Michigan is a 1-point favorite. Opened up with DC favored, got bet towards Michigan. Total here is 43. I see a little bit of value on the over, but I'm staying away for right now. We could get some light rain for this game. And while, normally you would never adjust any sort of football projections for light rain, the field quality in DC last week was a total disaster. Jontre Kirkland fell down on almost every route last week. Both DC and San Antonio last week looked pretty incompetent despite, the rain barely coming down. And it's just because these guys were slipping and sliding all over the place. I think you could argue, field care in the UFL probably isn't nearly as good as it is in a league like the NFL. And also, I'm not sure if these guys have, in the NFL, when weather's crazy, you see all the guys on the sidelines changing their spikes with the trainers. I'm not even sure that's, an option with these UFL equipment guys. So I am a little bit concerned about that. I'll keep an eye on weather tonight. I'll let the Discord know if I make any changes. I may not, but that is something to keep in mind here. In terms of injuries, the DC side is clean. On the Michigan side, we have a one key injury to look at. Danny Etling hasn't practiced due to an injury to his non-throwing hand. I'm really not worried. I believe he will play, but that is worth keeping an eye on. And then John Hightower still has not practiced due to the ankle injury he suffered over a month ago. Even if he does manage to play, I really don't think that would change much for fantasy purposes. Neil, starting out with the Michigan Panthers here. Danny Etling looks like a pretty tempting play. We have him with a pretty strong projection here. But, this Michigan offense, they've been extremely run heavy. I feel like most people would rather just pay up for Martinez and, pay or play some lower priced wide receivers. Really curious on your thoughts on, Danny Etling and then more broadly this Michigan passing attack, especially because they just haven't been throwing the ball very much and, they're favored here. So we wouldn't necessarily expect a pass heavy game again this week.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot. This is, of course, going against DC, who has given up the third most points in the UFL this year. They have not had a very strong defense. It is another one of those offenses where it's just like they spread the ball around so much. Just looking at the route participation, they have 7 guys who ran at least 10 routes last week. 6 of them ran at least 20 routes last week. Nobody got to 30 routes run last week on this team. So it's, and I guess part of that is just because, even Marcus Sims, 29 routes run, but that was 91% route share. So they just didn't throw the ball enough to get these guys up to the elite level of route participation. I kind of look at those. I look at the raw routes run more so than the route participation in general, just because it gives you a better overall idea of like how many routes a guy is running is more impactful, obviously, than like if there's only 10 routes to be had and a guy's running 90% of them. Well, that's still just 9 routes. So I look at the raw stuff a little bit more. And none of these guys, just from a raw routes run perspective, they're not that great. From a target perspective, we had Mariner up at 7 targets last week, Marcus Sims at 6. Those are fine numbers. They're not like elite, but those are pretty good. I'm probably gonna be underweight to Danny Etling. 11%. Maybe I take that back. I think I'll probably be close to the field on Danny Etling. If I have 10% Danny Etling, 11%, probably just fine for me. I think this is a nice enough matchup that they could get there even on low volume. I mean, 27 attempts last week, still got to 202 yards. Yeah, it's a tough spot because I don't really know who I want to pair him with. There's not like just those. I love the teams that just have, four receivers and you just have to mix and match those guys. This is one of those spots where it's like, I don't love that they don't have like a clear top option, but I think I guess Marcus Sims and COC Mariner do stand out to some extent. So I'll probably get to close to the field. I don't think I'm taking any huge stands on Michigan. I think my bigger stands is I'm probably going to be overweight to the running game for Michigan, but I'll probably be close to the field for the passing game also.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. For me, I'll pretty much only be pairing Etling with Mariner and Sims. Those are the only guys over an 80% route share. I would like to like Trey Quinn, but it's just really tough when you're running these low A dot routes and what is already a very low volume passing attack. Really hard to see an upside case for him there. I guess if you just really wanted to punt the position, you could play Cole Hicatini at tight end. I believe he's just 3,300. So, if you really wanted to just go with like a low end Etling stack, you could do something like that. But yeah, it's tough because Etling, in terms of fantasy points per dropback, has been the second most efficient quarterback in the UFL behind only Adrian Martinez. If only he had the pass game volume and maybe, just a little bit more of a condensed route share among some of these ancillary wide receivers, he could make for a really great stack. But it's hard for me to view him as anything other than, more of a mediocre stack. I also think, for what it's worth, Etling is probably the only quarterback I would put in the same category as Martinez, where, you can play him just by himself. You can play him with one stacking partner. You could even play him with two, but that does feel pretty thin given that I mean, Etling's such an erratic passer, and I really have a hard time seeing him get, anywhere close to that 300-yard passing bonus unless they get, down huge in this game. Any final takes on, those Etling stacks before we talk about the rushing game?
Yeah, I hate not having a really strong taker. It's just there are factors that I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's really nice for him, and then other factors where it's like, but I really it's tough. It's tough to really want to lean into it. So I end up with just like, yeah, I'll probably be close to the field. I think I'm largely with you. Sims and Mariner like the clear best stacking options here. We do have Devin Gray at 3,300. I guess we have some like cheap stacking options. I guess with Devin Gray, Cole Hicatini, I think are both fine like one-off pass catchers, and you can play them I think without at lean also if you're just looking for a salary saver. Both 20 routes run last week for Hicatini, 21 for Devin Gray. I think Gray probably my preference of the two of them. I think just more likely to pay it off with a splash play, but neither of them are like extremely strong low cheap options. They're just like, I think they're cheap guys you can mix in.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Devin Gray, of course, from the greatest school in the world, the University of Cincinnati, and famous for being way overprojected by one side in particular in Week 1. They will not be named. We won't mention that. It was me.
Yeah.
I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here. It was me, you guys. In terms of the ground game, Wes Hills and Matthew Colburn are roughly locked in a 50-50 split. Leans more in favor of Wes Hills when they get positive game script, more in favor of Colburn when they get negative game script. Red zone carries have been more in favor of Hills as well. I don't have a strong take here. I think it's going to be pretty tough for people to click Wes Hills. We only have him projected for 2% ownership, and that's because, if you have the salary to pay up at running back, you're going to end up on Jacob Sailors or John Lovett almost every time. Maybe Ricky Person. Just no one's going to want to click Wes Hills. And Neil, I would imagine to you that makes him a pretty tempting contrarian option here.
Yeah, and I like both of these guys. Wes Hills, you made the point a couple weeks ago. Wes Hills of being if it's to get the right game script, he is going to be the guy. He scored 3 touchdowns in that game, so we could get that once again. And getting 3 touchdowns at 2% ownership at I think a relatively thin running back position where nobody. I guess we have Lovett, but we don't have many great standouts at running back this week. Yeah, I'm into it. I'm going to be overweight to 2% Wes Hills. When I said I'm into the running game, I actually was thinking more Matthew Colburn at 7,000. Like he's one of our cheaper options at running back, involved in the passing game. I like that in a great matchup. There are games he's going to be involved either way. Like he will get some carries. He's not all just passing game, so he's involved either way, even if that participation drops off a little bit in a positive game script for Matthew Colburn. I just like that he's got kind of he'll be involved either way. He's only 7,000. He's not getting a ton of ownership. He'll rack up at least a couple PPR scam points. So I kind of like Colburn at 8%, but I think I'll probably be overweight to both of these running backs just because they're both getting such little ownership in a pretty good matchup.
Yeah, and the other note on Colburn is that we have seen him steal a few inside the five carries.
Yeah.
So, he could get a little bit of goal line run here despite being more of the pass catching back. I think that's reasonable. It's just, to me, I guess he's not nearly as tough of a click as Wes Hills, but at 7K, it is a lot tougher than in previous weeks where he was only 6,500. At the same time, that's going to keep ownership down. I don't think I'll end up on either of these Michigan running backs much, and that does make me a little bit nervous. But it does just feel like there are better options across the board. But I certainly see an argument for both guys here. All right. I think we covered everything on the Michigan side. We can move on to DC. Oh, I guess a final note for me with the Michigan guys is I really like either Colburn or Hills, more so Hills than Colburn, paired with the Michigan defense. I think that could be particularly appealing, especially if, we do get the light rain that leads to everybody slipping and sliding on this DC field. On the DC side of things, Jordan Teamu, once again, it feels like eventually he's going to blow up for a big game. I'm just not sure if this is the week against what's been a pretty tough Michigan defense in a lowish total game with some modest weather, field condition concerns. It's really hard to make a strong upside case for a guy like Teamu, but there's always the potential there. He's running a decent amount. We know he's a capable passer. I guess the real problem with Teamu is that, his stacking partners are going to be really popular. Kelvin Harmon projecting for 26% ownership. And then Ty Scott, who I thought was a really strong play last week after he was listed as the starter on the depth chart. They started off the broadcast. The broadcast crew said that the DC coaches told them that they want to get Ty Scott more involved, at least in part because he's been so efficient on a per route basis. One of the sharpest moves I think we've seen from the DC coaching staff this season, making him a full-time starter, ran as many routes as Kelvin Harmon did last week. Didn't really lead to much from a fantasy perspective, but him just being out there, I think is big. We have them both as comparable values overall. Obviously, Ty Scott significantly cheaper. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you. It feels like, Teamu's just not, it's hard to make a downside case for him. Like he's some terrible play, hard to make an upside case for him. Like he's a great play. Both of his stacking partners are projecting to be pretty popular. And I really don't see where else we can go here. Curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, it is. It's another one of those spots where it's like, I hate to not have a big stand here, but I don't think I have a big stand on the DC side. 9% ownership going to Teamu. I think you make a good point that it's like, who do you want to pair Teamu with? It is Kelvin Harmon. Like Kelvin Harmon felt inevitable watching that game last week. I was fading Kelvin Harmon pretty hard, and it was just like every time they threw the ball, it's like, yep, going to Harmon again, and it's just like, and he's gonna catch it. He's looked really good the past few weeks. Last week he just was the first time he really went off, but he's been, I think, 3 weeks in a row scored a touchdown since people started playing him. He has been very good. It's been very frustrating for me because I've been fading the chalk a little bit. 12 targets last week for Harmon, 26% ownership, feels pretty reasonable at 7,800. So the stack, if you're stacking it up the way that I think you should, which, as you said, Kelvin Harmon or Ty Scott, yeah, you're kind of leaning into ownership with the stack overall, even though Teamu is not particularly high owned. I also like Kelvin Harmon and Ty Scott are both, I think, fine one-offs. Like Ty Scott, one of the better values on the slate at 4,700. Kelvin Harmon, it's unclear to me if he's going to just like be an alpha in this league. Like he might be just one of those receivers that like, yeah, you want to play him until he's 9,500, 10,000. Like then at that point you have to think about it. Cause they seem to have figured out that he is the best receiver that they have. So maybe he just continues to be an alpha, for DC. My guess is I come in underweight to Harmon just because he is 7,800. We are hurting for value on this slate. He is 7,800. He has he has those games where he has been just running wind sprints out there. So I think I'll probably be a little bit underweight. Kind of hope that he doesn't get the quite as many targets this week and that they spread it out. Two guys like Ty Scott, and my guess is I'll be at the field or overweight to Ty Scott just because he is 4,700, 17% ownership. I think he might come on a little bit. Outside of those two, I don't know that I'm playing anybody else for DC in this passing game.
Yeah, I think if you wanted a pure punt, our best projected pure punt this week is Alex Ellis at 2,900. I mean, chances are he only gets you 2 or 3 fantasy points, but if he falls into the end zone at 2,900, I mean, you're looking at what should be a pretty great team, given the salary you would save there. Yeah, I don't know if I have any other takes here. This slot roll just feels like total dust. It'd be really nice if they could just give the entirety of the slot roll to either QD or Roland.
Yeah.
Then we could talk about some tangible upside here. But yeah, we have our QD projections pretty bad, our Chris Roland projections pretty bad. We're at pretty much an even split here in terms of how we expect fantasy production to wind up. So yeah, really not excited to play pretty much anyone else here other than Scott or Harmon. And again, Alex Ellis, if you're desperate to save salary, I think he's viable, but I certainly wouldn't want to go overboard there. The backfield here to me is really interesting this week. I think if you want to punt running back, there's a clear best option, and it's Darius Higgins. Last week we saw Cameron Harris handle, I believe, all the running back work until the second quarter. But once Darius Higgins touched the ball, he ended up handling about 67% of backfield carries from that point forward. And he looked pretty solid. Just full season, looking at the efficiency metrics of this backfield, Darius Higgins ranks second among 15 qualifying running backs in yards after contact per attempt and fourth in yards per carry. He's averaging 3.8 yards per carry, which obviously doesn't sound great, but that is zero point 0.8 more yards per carry than the non-Higgins backfield average. Zaquandre White has been an absolute disaster, just 2.6 yards per carry. Cameron Harris has been okay, but it's clear the team's looking for more. I mean, they fed Zaquandre White these last 2 weeks. For what it's worth, I think White is total dust now. Last week, he started out, playing a decent amount, and then there was a backwards pass to him that he made no effort in going after. It was a fumble, and he just didn't even try for it, didn't play a single snap for the rest of the game. So I think the coaches are just totally done with Zaquandre White. I don't even think they liked him that much in the first place, considering they cut him during camp.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me, this is just going to be all Higgins and Cameron Harris. I really hope that Cameron Harris is listed as the starter because that will keep Higgins' ownership down. I do worry, though, that Higgins could be listed as the starter and get really steamed up across the industry. So, Neil, I'll throw it over to you. I know that in the past you've gotten burnt on Darius Higgins, but are you ready to come back to the well for a 5K running back that enables some pretty solid builds?
Yeah, I will say the one downside is this Michigan defense has been really tough against the run, allowing just 79 yards per game against the run so far this year. So that is the downside to Darius Higgins. But I am with you that if you're playing somebody from this backfield, he looked like he had the most juice last week. He is, as we said, we're kind of hurting for running back value this week. He is the one that kind of allows you to pay up elsewhere because he's just 5,000. So at 5% ownership, 5,000, I do think that Darius Higgins is fine. I'm not going to be going, if it were in a better matchup, I would lean into it like I did with Morgan Ellison last week. I do think that he's more projectable, obviously, than Morgan Ellison was last week. So I'll probably be overweight to the 5% we have going to Darius Higgins. Just because of the matchup, I can't really go in. I'm not going to be getting to like 30% Higgins because I do think this is one of the worst matchups for a running back in the league.
Yeah, that is a fair point. I mean, we know DC wants to pound the rock. They have been more pass heavy in general this year, in part because, not as much positive game script. They aren't dominating these games as much as they did in 2023. But, Higgins, 5,000, you have a decent chance at double digit carries here. Even if he is a little inefficient, I still think he could post a pretty good score. And realistically, you might only need 9 or 10 points and then just hope the expensive wide receivers that you can pay up for can get you there in a Darius Higgins build. But I would definitely keep an eye on the depth chart because I would imagine we will have to adjust ownership up significantly if he is listed as the starter, although that would be a bit of a surprise here.
Can I just make a note? Because I'm taking advantage of this worksheet that you and Chris provided for me, learning how to really work through it. So I just filtered I want to see what it looks like for the past 3 weeks, see if it's gotten any better. It's gotten even worse for running backs against Michigan. Michigan giving up just 65 yards per game. On the other end, DC giving up 135 yards per game on the ground over the past 3 weeks. Really makes me want to lean more into that Michigan backfield that's going kind of low owned. So just to note, because I was thinking like, man, I want any excuse to play Darius Higgins at 5,000 as we're looking for a cheap running back, and that's tough.
Yeah, no, that is tough. That's a really great point in terms of matchup. That does make me a little more tempted by a guy like Wes Hills here. Maybe I will adjust a John Lovett or Jacob Saylor's team of two to try to get to a guy like Hills at low ownership. And again, I mean, I think same sort of thing that I said with Hills, where pairing Darius Higgins with the DC defense makes a lot of sense in case this game just ends up being super gross, super low scoring. Maybe the teams combined for 2 or 3 touchdowns. Higgins plus the DC defense could be pretty nice there. Any final notes on this game before we move on, Neil?
No, I think we've covered it.
Yep, I do as well. All right, our final game of the slate kicks off Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's the San Antonio Brahmas at the Houston Roughnecks. San Antonio is favored by 3.5. Total here is 38.5. It opened at 40. It's gotten bet down a little bit. To me, this game is a clear stay away. I really don't see much value. I will note that there are some weather concerns here. I really don't plan on making any adjustments for weather until later tonight, and if I do, they'll be relatively minor. It didn't seem like anything crazy, but could be some rain and maybe a little bit of wind. In terms of, I'll ask you, Neil. Do you like any bets here? Do you want to back our Brahmas at -3.5?
I always want to back our Brahmas at -3.5. Man, the total being at just 38.5. That is so nuts. But the Brahmas defense getting healthier. Roughnecks a pretty good defense. So it's really hard for me to even want to take the over at 38.5. I think if I'm taking anything, it is probably our Brahmas at 3.5. I know Wade Phillips, was I listened to the Wednesdays with Wade interview. He has some vengeance in his heart from being fired by Houston after last year, 2 years. I forget when he was fired by Houston. Either way, he has some vengeance in his heart. Wants to stick it to him. So I think the Brahmas, if they have the opportunity to outscore them by more than 3 points, they're going to take advantage of it. So I'll take the over on. I'll take San Antonio with the points there.
Yeah, I imagine it will be pretty tempting for San Antonio to keep their foot on the gas after they decided, hey, we don't want Wade Phillips, or after the league decided, hey, we don't want Wade Phillips and AJ Smith coaching the Roughnecks, the team they've always coached. We want to first fire them, and then when Hines Ward said, hey, you're not going to pay me enough to be a coach, okay, then we'll go back to Wade and AJ Smith. Just ridiculous. I mean, trying to sacrifice those guys in favor of Curtis Johnson, I would certainly be holding a grudge as well. In terms of injuries here, Morgan Ellison was limited on Wednesday due to a shoulder injury. I expect him to play. Anthony McFarland is listed as a DNP for Wednesday's practice due to the shoulder injury he suffered a few weeks ago. But head coach Wade Phillips did say that he returned to practice. So I would just keep an eye on his availability. I would be a little surprised if McFarland managed to play. I think he's probably a week away. But yeah, definitely keep an eye on that because this looks like the first week he's live to actually make a return to the Brahmas lineup. We should find out about that in just a few hours here when they release inactives tonight. On the Houston side, Anthony Ratliff-Williams missed Wednesday's practice due to an illness. We expect him to play, but that is worth keeping an eye on. That would be a significant boost for Emmanuel Butler and Cyril Grayson if he ends up missing. Starting out with the Brahmas, it's pretty clear that the field's ready to get away from Quinn Dormady. I mean, he just hasn't looked that good. And, of course, the Brahmas have looked like a great rushing team rather than the great passing team we all sort of expected them to be. So, yeah, Neil, I'll throw it over to you here because I just, to me, it feels like sort of like St. Louis light with this passing attack where, none of these guys are really projecting that well. They're all pretty expensive. I guess you have a decent salary saving option in Justin Smith. I really don't have many strong takes on these pass catchers or on Dormady, who I just don't think I'm going to get to much of. I'm curious what you think, though.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to be playing the pass catchers once again just because of the ownership. Who knows if Dormady lasts the entire game? They did sign another quarterback. Wade Phillips, he was asked about this new quarterback they signed and kind of skipped over the question. So I don't know if they're planning on making a change there. I doubt it. I think that Dormady is probably still the quarterback for this game at least. But there's at least a little bit of risk there. At 6% ownership, I'm probably willing to take some shots on Dormady. I'll probably be, because he is so unowned at 6% and not that expensive at 9,400. I'll take my shots on Quentin Dormady again. He had some games in the UFL where he looked legit. He has not looked good, or sorry, in the XFL. He has not looked good in the UFL so far. He has been pretty rough out there, and I made excuses for him. Wade Phillips made excuses for him a couple weeks ago where it was like, yeah, he had 3 interceptions, but 2 of them weren't really his fault. Last week, he just did not look good at all. As you said, maybe it was the light rain. Maybe it was affecting him a little bit. We can hope. We can make that argument, I guess. So I'll probably be overweight to 6% on Quentin Dormady, even though it does feel kind of gross. That's just really low ownership for an offense that early in the year was really humming along. I will say, I also was not really impressed with a lot of their decision making last week. It felt like they were cowarding out, like 4th and 2 from the 40. You're going to kick a long field. I don't know if that's the exact scenario, but it felt like they were not really going for it as much, as not being as aggressive as I thought they were going to be. So I have some concerns that it could just be like they don't have confidence in their quarterback, in which case maybe I'm foolish for taking shots here. But because I do believe in these pass catchers in general, and they're coming in, all of them, at, I think, lower ownership than they should be, I think I will take my shots on Jontre Kirkland, Cody Latimer, Marquez Stevenson, and Justin Smith. I'm probably still not going to Alize Mack despite the touchdown efficiency there. I think I'm just going to those 4 pass catchers. Justin Smith, probably my favorite at 5,100. 2% projected ownership, 100% route participation last week. And as we've said, Quentin Dormady has a bigger arm than Chase Garbers. And I think Justin Smith, one of those guys that he could have a splash play where he has a 50-yard touchdown and pays it off this price tag with just 1 play. So I think Justin Smith, my favorite of the San Antonio pass catchers, but Speedy Stevenson at 7,300, 3% ownership, 90% route participation. Another guy that I think could benefit from, even though we haven't seen it, he could benefit from, if Quentin Dormady figures it out. I think Marquez Stevenson could be pretty good. Cody Latimer has been pretty involved all season. 8 targets last week for Latimer. He's just 6,900. So I think 6% ownership is reasonable. And then Jontre Kirkland is just one of the bigger alphas, I would say, in the league in terms of target share. He just does every week. He's going to get his targets. So even though he's 10,500 and, seems to be doing a lot more like screens, like not really a vertical threat that you'd like him to be, I still think just the volume is high enough that I hope that he can, break one of those off anyway. I'll take my shots at 13% ownership. Probably not going to be too overweight to the field on Jontre Kirkland. Probably be closer to the field there, but I'll be, I think, overweight to the field on all of Latimer, Stevenson, and Justin Smith.
Yeah, I think Kirkland, he's a guy that, I kind of want to just force in more than, the ownership we have projected. But, it's the same problem as Hakeem Butler, where if you're playing, Adrian Martinez plus Jontre Kirkland plus a decent running back, then all of a sudden you just have nothing left over. And that certainly makes things tough, which is the reason for the 12% projected ownership on Kirkland, easily the lowest we have anticipated this year. For what it's worth, I do think you can mostly write off last week's game, like I said, on the basis of the field conditions just being terrible. Jontre Kirkland was falling down all over the place. So was Justin Smith. Marquez Stevenson is certainly interesting. I mean, I think I mentioned last week that he was hurt in week 5. He lost a contact in week 3. Yep. So you could sort of write off, those games because of that. At the same time, he hasn't looked as, quick or fluid as he has previously. So I do wonder if maybe there's an unreported injury going on with him. I think that's possible, but also, I mean, how much can you extrapolate from last week when, everyone was just falling over on their routes? It's really hard for just about anybody to stay up. And I think that could maybe explain a little bit of Cody Latimer's volume, where he's running a lot of these shorter ADOT routes where you don't have to make hard cuts. You're a little bit less likely to fall over. So just me doing some probably over extrapolating from some film stuff. Backfield's pretty straightforward. It looks like it's going to be John Lovett. Of course, if Anthony McFarland ends up active, that really muddies things and will certainly bring Lovett's projection down significantly. Would also bring his projected ownership down significantly. Right now, we have him around 35% projected ownership. Last week, he led all running backs in weighted opportunity, a workload that was worth 23.7 fantasy points. Ended up scoring 26.4 with 154 yards from scrimmage for John Lovett, 88% of backfield weighted opportunity on an 84% snap share. So, again, assuming it's just him and Ellison, the team also signed Puka Williams, but I expect that to just be as, a kick returner. Maybe he catches, a screen or something like that, but he won't be significantly involved in this offense, at least this week, even if he is active. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you. Any love for our guy, John Lovett?
Yeah, I mean, John Lovett. I think even if Anthony McFarland comes back, I think that they've just established John Lovett as the guy at this point. He's been so good. 23 carries for 153 yards last week. I will say it just occurred to me after we've done the talk about Quentin Dormady. That's one thing that Wade Phillips did say in his in the Wednesdays with Wade radio segment was, now that we have established the run, now that we've shown, back-to-back weeks, like how good we can be on the run, I want to work in a lot more play action. So that could benefit Quentin Dormady. The fact that they have really established the run showed that they are a very capable running team. Maybe they have some more open looks through the passing game because they have, been so good on the ground with John Lovett. It's not a great matchup for John Lovett. This is a defense that, again, over the past 3 weeks, Houston giving up just 74 yards per game on the ground. So some things going against it, but man, yeah. Last week, speaking of, like, sometimes when you are a galaxy brain guy like I am, where you're just like, all right, this doesn't project well, but I'm going to do it anyway. Sometimes you look really good coming out of it, and sometimes you play Morgan Ellison and he gets -5 yards in the first half and just gets absolutely buried by the starting running back John Lovett. So this is one that I played it completely wrong last week. I think I played more Morgan Ellison than John Lovett last week, thinking, based on reading the tea leaves, listening to the coach, I thought it's going to be a more even split than we're expecting. It was not a more even split than we were expecting. John Lovett just he I think is just the guy here. I think that he's, I don't know, even if McFarland comes back, I don't think I'm going anywhere but John Lovett. 36% ownership in this matchup. I think I'm going to be underweight to John Lovett. I think I'm going to go to some of the cheaper running backs, but again, I do think that he's probably like the safest. I think he's probably the cash game running back in this league, just based on the volume. But from a GPP perspective, I'm going to be underweight to 36% John Lovett. Just lean into some of the cheaper running backs and hope that they do pass the ball a little bit more in San Antonio this week. So I love it from he's as projectable as anybody in the league, but at 36% ownership and an $8,700 price tag, I'll take my shots on some cheaper guys.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, for what it's worth, I definitely see your argument that McFarland could come back and Lovett could still be the guy. And that would really lower his ownership, I think. I mean, we and all the other sites would really have no choice but to at least take a few points away from Lovett. And that would probably bump him down from the mid 30s to the low 20s, mid 20s, something like that. So that could certainly make him a more tempting play in GPPs. And, for what it's worth, Neil, like I said, if Morgan Ellison had scored on his lone red zone carry last week that ended up going for -5 yards, you would be looking like quite the genius this week. But
I mean, it still would have had 7 points on the week, even if he scored that touchdown, I think.
So. Well, I mean, who knows what could have happened with the usage after he scored that touchdown. But all right, moving on to did you have any other notes on San Antonio here? I think they're pretty condensed. So I think
I think they are. I think we've covered it pretty well.
All right, moving on to the Houston side here. I'm going to do a little bit of reading the tea leaves because I am legitimately worried that Jarrett Guarantano could start this game. Now, for what it's worth, on ESPN Bet, Reed Sinet's prop is 205 passing yards. You don't want to bet this now, but when the depth charts come out, if Guarantano is the starter, the under is an auto play. It's like what Troy Williams was last week. They listed Troy Williams at, I believe, 211.5 passing yards. Cookus was already announced the starter at that point. Everyone, didn't matter what Discord you were in, you were betting that Troy Williams under. He did manage to take a few snaps in a blowout near the end of the game. So that ended up being basically free money. So that would be something I'd look out for this game. Is I'm legitimately worried Jared Guarantano could start, and that's because during his midweek media availability, Curtis Johnson said, we need to be looking at taking more shots downfield, which, I mean, they need to be looking at all kinds of things, but sure, shots downfield, I'll give it to him. That's fine. During camp, Curtis Johnson was very, very complimentary on Jarrett Guarantano's arm, his deep passing ability. So I am worried that comment sort of hinted at Jarrett Guarantano starting this game. That would really, really lower. I would probably bet San Antonio -3.5 immediately. That would really lower the passing expectation of this offense. Justin Hall has a receiving prop, I believe, in the high 40s, maybe low 50s. I'd be looking at his under as well. That could really, really change things for this offense. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there in terms of, we're most of our analysis is going to be, Reed Sinnett is starting, just going with that as the assumption. But if Guarantano is the starter, you'll want to look at Sinnett's under, Justin Hall's under, San Antonio -3.5, because Guarantano is just a complete disaster of a quarterback. I have no idea how he's even, still on a roster at this point. But all right, assuming Reed Sinnett is the starter here, as these low priced quarterbacks go, he's only 8,200. He's projecting for 4 or 5% ownership. A lot of the other cheaper quarterbacks, guys like Luis Perez and Troy Williams, are going to see double that in terms of ownership. So that's a little interesting. And then we have a pretty clear order in terms of these wide receivers. Again, Justin Hall, the clear alpha, and then Kiki Chisholm, pretty much the clear wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 3, they're splitting routes there between Ratliff Williams, Cyril Grayson, and Emmanuel Butler. Again, need to keep an eye on Ratliff Williams' status to see if he ends up missing due to an illness. That would be pretty surprising, but noted that at the top of this game. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you. Any love for Reed Sinnett and what could just be a very, very gross, sort of defensive battle with a 38.5 total? At the very least, he'll be low owned.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be under the field. I think I'm probably going to have 0 Reed Sinnett here. I think the Brahmas getting healthier. I also think to your point about the line, how quickly do they pull those lines? Like if we do get news that it is Guarantano.
They basically don't. Last year we had a situation in XFL where AJ McCarron was ruled inactive about 90 minutes before the game. They didn't pull the line. It actually took about 15 minutes for the line to adjust at all. And they went from AJ McCarron to Nick Tiano. So, these sports books are extremely slow at adjusting these lines. I'm sure ESPN Bet would be extremely slow at adjusting player props. They would probably move a little bit faster than, say, your average sports book would, because they just have more on the line listing player props. But yeah, I would not be worried about them pulling the line at all. So yeah,
I was the only reason I asked. I was going to say I'd probably take the under anyway if the line is 205. I think on the year San Antonio giving up 201 yards through the air, and that's giving up a little bit more in recent weeks because they've been really banged up. Now they get healthier at the defensive back position. Some of their defenders coming back this week, so and not a Houston offense that I believe in. So I probably would take the under regardless. But yeah, I think if they aren't going to pull the line, you can wait and make sure that is the case. But regardless, I don't think I'm playing Sinnett. I am willing to play Justin Hall, Kiki Chisholm as one-offs. 5,700 Kiki Chisholm. Ran 32 routes last week. Looks really good. Justin Hall, pretty chalky, 26% projected ownership going to Hall, whereas just 13% Chisholm. But 9 targets last week for Justin Hall. I'll probably be underweight to the field there just because I don't think this offense is going to do much through the air. But given the 9 targets, given that he seems to be the best receiver there. I think you said before, Justin Hall, one of the best receivers in the league. Even though I don't really believe in the passing attack overall, it's hard to want to be too far underweight to the field there. But I think I will be. I think I will be slightly. I'm continuing because I saw you taking a sip right as I finished there. I think I'll be underweight to Justin Hall, probably overweight to Kiki Chisholm, and probably staying away from everybody else here.
Yeah, I appreciate you jumping in. No dead air here. On the
I realized
breakdown.
At the last second that you were taking a sip.
Yeah, I realized at the last second that was a poorly timed sip of water. For what it's worth, I do think Cyril Grayson was second on the team last week in target share. 21%. I kind of wanted to write him up as just like a low price flyer, but it's so hard for me to make, a compelling upside case for a guy who basically has no chance at beyond a 50% route share. Of course, if, Ratliff Williams is ruled out, that really changes the equation, and Cyril Grayson is all of a sudden looking like a pretty solid value across the board. But I will note that, he is a great deep threat, former track star. So if Guarantano is the starter, well, I think that, largely kills Justin Hall, probably kills Kiki Chisholm. Cyril Grayson might still, find a way to get like a 50-yard receiving touchdown because, it seemed like heading into the season, the team really wanted to do tons of Mark Thompson, lots of play action, and lots of deep shots with Guarantano at quarterback, obviously because of injuries that we really never saw that materialize. But I do think that was their general offensive philosophy maybe 3 weeks before the season started, and injuries sort of derailed things here. So yeah, Cyril Grayson's a little interesting, probably more interesting for Showdown. He's got a decent projection for us, but yeah, to me, he's basically the same as maybe like a Steven Mitchell, where you're banking on a long touchdown for the most part there. Really don't think I have any other notes on these pass catchers. So when it comes to the backfield, and this was just like, I mean, if you wanted to tilt Curtis Johnson even more, here you go. In his post-game press conference this week, which, by the way, Houston's post-game press conferences have been ridiculously short. This one was only 2 minutes long because no one has any questions for a team this bad and this terrible. But he did say that Mark Thompson still is not in tip-top shape, which is why he hasn't gotten the workload that he saw last year. So it seems like they're, and for what it's worth, Mark Thompson, 14 touches last week. That was his most of the season. So encouraging. Wasn't quite his best workload in terms of weighted opportunity, which does skew in favor of targets and red zone carries pretty significantly. But, it was encouraging to see Mark Thompson get a few more touches. I believe it was also his highest snap share of the season. At the same time, though, I mean, if you didn't think he was in shape, why did you tell us 2 weeks ago he was getting 20 to 25 touches? I mean, this is just completely insane. But yeah, I guess my TLDR here is it seems like they're sort of, inching closer and closer to a true bell cow workload for a guy like Mark Thompson. Spread here is only 3.5. The last 2 weeks played Birmingham, played St. Louis. That led to some serious negative game script for Houston. This week we could see a little different. So, Neil, are you ready to lose more money on Mark Thompson this week?
Yeah, probably. 8,200, 11% ownership. I'm probably going to fall for it again. If I'm playing this Houston side at all, it's probably going to be on Mark Thompson. Just bet on the talent, bet on the Derrick Henry of the league. From what I hear, and he's looked okay. Like there have been times where I've seen it. I of course didn't watch USFL, so I haven't seen him in his true glory other than a couple highlights that I've watched. But he's looked okay. I think that he's probably coming along nicely. So 11% ownership, 8,200. I'm not taking any huge stands on Mark Thompson just because the salary is there. And I mean, if the coach doesn't think he's in tip-top shape, he's probably not going to give him 25 touches. Who knows? You never really know with Curtis Johnson. Maybe he does. But yeah, probably not going too far overweight, but I could see myself being 15, 20%. Just bet on the talent there.
Yeah, I mean, another note on Thompson that is at least a little encouraging is that last week he was, listed again on the depth chart as the RB2, but he started the first half and the second half. So that's the first time we've seen that all year. Hopefully they list him as the RB1 this week. That would sort of be like another indication that maybe they're starting to move in the right direction with this usage. But, do we really believe the Houston depth chart after they listed Pledger as the starter last week and then started Mark Thompson? I don't know. It may not mean anything, but it will be something that I'm looking out for a little bit. Probably won't even adjust his projection much from it. But I mean, we know he's got great upside. If Houston can keep this game, either in neutral game script or they get out ahead, he can get to 20 touches. It's certainly possible. And I think this is sort of another one, like I mentioned with these last few games, where I do really like Mark Thompson paired with the Houston defense. I mean, we've seen Dormady just has not looked very good. I actually wouldn't be shocked if he ended up getting benched at some point this year. So yeah, I think Thompson plus the Houston defense is a little bit interesting. Neil, I would assume, I mean, I know I'm not, but I would assume you're not getting to any TJ Pledger on the slate.
I don't think I am. The 0.5% ownership is a little bit interesting. The $60 to $100 price tag, a little bit interesting. But ultimately, I think I'd rather just give more of that ownership to Darius Victor at 700 more. So probably not getting TJ Pledger.
Yeah, I unless you have anything else on this game, I think that pretty much covers everything.
No, I think we've covered it.
All right. Do you have any? I mean, like just thinking about my teams, I'm going to end up on a ton of game stacks from the Saturday games. So late swap for me, I really won't be able to do many like full stack swaps, which certainly makes this, this pretty tough. But I'm just sorting by ownership for the last few games here to see, maybe who I'd want to go to. It's really difficult because you're like most teams just aren't going to have many players remaining, and the players that you do have remaining will probably be on the cheaper end. So I'm curious, if there's anyone who stands out to you in these final two games as a potential, decent late swap option. I think some of these San Antonio receivers are interesting, but I would also imagine a lot of people may not have the salary to get there. I guess Justin Smith is pretty interesting, but he's going to be, what do we have him at, like 10%? So
if you have Lovett in the flex, I think that you could swap on to the expensive pass catchers instead of Lovett. Like that would be a late swap I would make if you're Lovett. Yeah, it is a little bit tough to swap on to Kelvin Harmon. Similarly, you can just swap off Kelvin Harmon to some of those Brahmas. I think those are probably my favorite. If you're going expensive, the Brahmas receivers would swap off your Kelvin Harmon and John Lovett to get to the less chalky receivers from the Brahmas is probably
Yeah.
the swap I would make.
Yeah, I think that's sharp. Especially Lovett. He'll be the guy who ends up on most people's teams here. Justin Hall, I guess, would be similar. We seem to always be over projecting Justin Hall's ownership, though, so I'm not sure he'll end up quite as popular as what we currently have. And I did misspeak on Justin Smith. We only have him around 2% projected ownership. I might bump that up slightly, but single digits for him is pretty tempting. So yeah, if you need to get away, you're trailing, you only have Lovett remaining, you're fighting for your life for just a min cash, moving off, John Lovett for a guy like Marquez Stevenson, Justin Smith, something
Even
along.
if he's in the running back slot, I mean, would you go to Wes Hills there? I think like coming
Yeah.
into Sunday, you could go to Wes Hills there. Otherwise, Mark Thompson a little bit lower owned, but still, yeah, it'd probably be Wes Hills, right?
Yeah, it would be West Hills. And I think that's another note. It's important to keep in mind, if you're only hand building, say 1 to 5 teams, which I would imagine a handful of people who watch the show are, maybe the vast majority, you definitely want to keep late swap in mind when you're building your roster, because if you build a roster, you use up all the salary, you put John Lovett in your running back slot, you don't have the extra 200 needed to get up to a guy like Wes Hills. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, is just sort of have a plan for, okay, if I'm way behind, who am I going to get to in these Sunday games to try to help me catch up at low ownership? Yeah. Any final notes on late swap before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, I think that is a really important note. Make sure you have the players in the right spots. Don't have the early guy games in your flex. Yeah, it's a sharp note.
Yeah, for sure. That is standard DFS procedure. Your latest start time should be in your flex. That gives you maximum late swap flexibility. Although sometimes I like to live a little. I like to put a Saturday guy in the flex just for the thrill. But that certainly wouldn't be advisable. Neil, before we get going here, you have a great podcast that I'm sure you'd love to tell the people about, and you just launched your own Discord, the Flannelverse, which I aim to be, a popular troll in there. But I'm curious. Can you let the people know about the Flannelverse and your lovely show?
Yeah, you were certainly one of my favorite trolls in the Flannelverse so far. Yeah, just launched this week, so we haven't gotten really going in the Flannelverse so far. But it's supposed to be just I've got my podcast playing for keeps. Should be doing that again next week. I've also got best ball that I'm doing 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, doing best ball streams. It is called Best Ball Whenever, which partially because that just gives me the optionality of when do I want to do this. And it's been a little bit hectic for me lately with the Timberwolves being in the playoffs. I'm going to a lot of games, going out to watch a lot of games. Plus, I've got softball on Tuesday night, so I'm being flexible with the timing. But usually, I'm streaming at either 9 o'clock Eastern or 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern, 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern or 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern is my usual time there. So if you want to come stream with me, draft against me in those streams, if you think I'm a huge fish and you want to draft against me, you can do that. Or if you want to tail me, try and learn my process, or just want to hang out, just come have a drink with me while I'm drafting. I'm doing it 4 days a week. And yeah, please do come join the Flannelverse Discord. I have tweeted out. I'm on Twitter /X at PlayerQDFS. You can go find the Discord there. Would love to have you.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely go check out all that stuff. Really love Neil's YouTube channel. Playing for Keeps is probably my all-time favorite DFS show. I've learned a ton. It's helped my process immensely. Just, you hear the best DFS players in the world talk about their process. I'm not sure there are many other shows that offer you stuff like that. Love Neil's best ball streams, and you can certainly catch me in both the Fantasy Points Discord, UFL General, UFL DFS, and of course in the Flannelverse, making fun of Neil for not lifting and only running, which is a little suspect to me. But we'll get out of here on a high note. Thank you so much for tuning into the Week 7 edition of the UFL Breakdown. Really appreciate it, guys, and I will see you all at the top of the leaderboards.